Hello. Reverend MeeLing here, or Reverend Susan MeeLing, or Lady Dori Belle, had a few nicknames. I figured, with everything going on right now, how much fun it would be to do a scary version of reading. My book, They'll Save the Kennedy Curse, fused with science fiction fantasy. I even set up some candles, did different stuff with the lighting. I thought it would be so much fun to do a little scary version. Ready? Okay. Chapter 3. He explained to Luke as soon as the two finished loading the vehicle. Neither spoke a word to the other, while the MP4 player in the SUV had covered the silence. The underlying tones echoed across state lines for miles, trying to only take backwood country landscaped roads. Christopher drove towards safety. Christopher purposefully took all day to travel towards the countryside to get the two away from the city and closer to a single cabin sitting on a several-acre lot. He was excited to go to his personal retreat given to him by the company after decades of loyal service. Once they were close enough to the house, he drove to a store for the necessities, stopping for a brief moment to grab several smaller grocery items for them while she remained in the vehicle, thinking to herself. Though the two were happy to get away from everything involving the fight, though much needed to be discussed. For the moment, time seemed to stand still as Christopher and Luke continued discussing the past, while Maggie wandered in and out of the conversation. Loading the items into the last space available in the middle row, they completed the journey to the cabin. Christopher joked with Luke, for some reason, when I finished packing the groceries into the trunk, I knew I did have the need to offer my protective services. Looking towards her, drinking a sip, Christopher added with a grin, though she is the one who oddly was able to be triggered for the unexplainable oddities. Luke was far from being amused by the attempted joke, and Christopher quickly received the memo. Pausing the conversation briefly to finish a different point, the two spoke of the residential area. A few days passed before vultures started circling the area overhead, causing a nearby neighborhood to investigate the attraction. Almost more than a week afterwards, the neighbors expected to find a larger decaying animal. Some thought it might even be a herd of animals, warning to call authorities of the disease. The moment the group arrived, all were taken off guard. The group of adventurers were quick to vomit upon seeing the sight of the large massacre of bodies. While covering their mouths, the adults tried to hide their children from seeing the decay, unable to prevent their eyes from seeing the vulture-filled field of death. Most were intrigued after clearing their stomachs. News crews with cameras rolling to capture the sights of the police officers made their way to the scene, but law enforcement was too late. Once the police were contacted and the reports of the discovery of all those bodies, the coroner was beyond perplexed. Local law enforcement authorities could not understand the ability of one bullet simultaneously lodged within all those mercenaries. Adding, all the kill shots were in the exact same place from the same unknown brand. Trying to locate the symbol through the computer programs, nothing was found. All collected bullets had precisely the same barrel and pin pattern, which had been pulled from the bullet within all of those agents, creating more curiosities for the doctors, as they had been at the same bullet being embedded within the skull of each and every helicopter pilot as well. Giving up with the lack of understanding, federal agents were contacted and sent into that mission. The groups who called for the assassination were alerted by breaking news on all channels and internet sources, without any of their hired hands within the firm who monitored the public relations. All collapsed and grew weak instantly. Without warning, the phones and notification sounds alerted each individual of the finding within the attempt. Scrambling to figure out what to do next, the groups contacted both mercenary companies. All four groups wanted to have a joint conference, and Christopher's boss took the meeting one step further, informing each group they were not the only ones who wanted to see Maggie's demise, stunning each. Inquiring for more information, the boss told the individual group members the time and place. Agreeing with the other mercenary company to arrange to meet together with all four groups simultaneously occurred rapidly. Christopher and Maggie told Luke neither would know of these events until much later, and far too late of that field. Once at the new housing location, she remained silent for days on end, admitting she had specific tendencies for the day. It took her time to acclimate to the new surroundings. First, she needed to acclimate to the direction of the doors to leave the cabin where they were. While muddling through the new entrance location, she also worked towards adjusting to all of the windows, though not many. They had been placed for optimal sunlight. Unable to communicate with Christopher of her needs, he thought he genuinely understood her from his observations. Noticing her sleep in the room, he prepared for her in a short notice, and he left a note by the nightstand. He informed her of the location for the recently prepared food and other possible necessary items. Christopher kept himself busy with odds and ends needing tending to around the property. Going to work and clearing brush had been some of the main tasks. During the first days, he could schedule it into the day, cutting down old decaying limbs from the trees. He prepared 2 separate piles of wood. One pile was ready to be stacked closer to the house to dry out for firewood, while the other half was left to dry for kindling. Leaving the house after asking her if she wanted anything from the store, Christopher left to pick up extra groceries and cleaning supplies. Still keeping silent when he returned, she helped bring the bags inside of the cabin, quickly returning to the room he had set up for Maggie. Christopher organized the items purchased from the store. After everything had been put away, he started to prepare food to cook for dinner. Creating a small buffet of different meats and vegetables, he tried inviting Maggie out from the room. She thanked him, but remained behind the doors, locked inside of the room. In the beginning of the following day, he attempted to bring her a breakfast plate. However, she did not touch it and left the food outside of the door. Making sure she had not vacated the premises, he walked outside of the building, sneaking his way around the back to look through the windows to see if he saw her shadow. Thinking he had seen her body moving through the shadow of the drapes, he spoke of the other necessary work around the property to Luke. Walking towards the direction of the garage to lift the tarp off of his tractor, he started a new field work for the land, tearing up the roots from the weeds while his perspiration glistened in the sunlight. He attached the hitch to the tractor, helping to pull the work along and making the work easier. Christopher moved along with the maintenance quickly. Once completed with the necessary chores for the day, he returned to the house. Removing all of his clothing once in the bedroom, he threw the items into the soiled laundry bin. Walking to the restroom to turn the shower water on, he waited for the heat to come through the pipes. Stepping into the steam, he cleaned off his flesh. Once the last of the soap bubbles washed off of his muscular physique, Christopher turned off the shower water, drying off with the Egyptian cotton intertwined with bamboo threads, the soft and absorbent towel soaked in each droplet, having similar results for lunch and dinner for the day as he had with breakfast in regards to Maggie. Christopher started becoming aggravated from her attitude, swallowing his pride and biting his tongue because of the abrupt changes and reality of the bounty for her head. He moseyed along with other chores. The next 6 weeks wore weary on his soul without any communication from Maggie. Each time he tried to speak with her by even a small whisper caused her to jump and run off. His attempts fell through the deafness of the evening within the surrounding empty countryside. Taking efforts to reach out through writing notes, nothing had been written in return. Several forms of medium to communicate non-verbally were attempted to help the gap between the two. Admitting he always enjoyed time away from most civilization, Christopher was getting tired of not getting anywhere with Maggie. Food continued to be cooked and left at her bedroom door, repeatedly being left untouched. Christopher told of his frustrations to Luke from each failed attempt, becoming extremely angry as he started banging on the door one day while opening and walking through the entrance to her room. At the same time he had barged into the room with Maggie, he only saw a form beneath the comforter. Underneath the covers, it seemed a body was beneath, but he reached to feel the being necessarily overly cautious. Slowly pulling the covers away from her head, and she wailed out an agonizing yelp, quickly returning the blanket over the top of her, leaving the room in a hurry to shut the door quietly behind him. Christopher told Luke of the shock of a lifetime. Feeling as if her vocal cords had reached out and touched every fiber of his being, he felt similar to a strangling effect. Covering his mouth with one hand and his neck with the other, he tried to prevent further hyperventilation, calming himself from the fear striking the core of his soul. Christopher tried to recuperate from the painful sounds. He looked to the side from the sunlight coming through a window, catching Christopher's attention, scarring him and scaring him. All windows had cracked spider webbing outward slowly, moving closer to one of the windows within the checkerboard wooden frame in the hallway. He cautiously moved his hand to touch. Startling Christopher instantly, his boss from the mercenary company stood on the other side of the threshold, looking to him about the touch of glass. The boss hissed in his direction. The head of the organization stood in the hallway of the hidden countryside cabin. Slowly walking towards Christopher, he grinned softly, grabbing his cheek while explaining to Luke. He had similarly grabbed his chest one time from the heart attack sensation then. Feeling similar sensations, Christopher took a few seconds before continuing the storyline. The boss had come to check in with the two of them, wanting to know of her progress. Christopher informed the many setbacks and difficulties as he simply nodded slightly, asking a limited number of questions while the two walked towards the kitchen. The head of the organization wanted informative details, trying to give the top of all the possible details while walking. The top boss listened to Christopher. Without change in any part of his body language or facial expressions, the boss simply listened quietly. Once the accordion door had been pulled out of the slot within the wall to close, Christopher told Luke the boss sighed a few times. Mostly remaining silent in the kitchen during the explanation of the two residing in the cabin, Christopher awaited for the upcoming lecture for the mess left behind. Knowing he would hear of the problems created because he had not personally cleaned up the bodies, nor contacted the owner, Christopher admitted to fearing while wondering which way the conversation would go and how much he would suffer for the missteps. Silence overcame the kitchen even after offering the boss the choice between coffee and tea. Having brought his own container with beverage of choice, the boss ignored Christopher. Beginning with the questions in reference to Maggie, Christopher was unable to produce anything beyond his reports. Walking back to the room to grab a folder with typewriter descriptions of all occurrences he had witnesses. Handing the green folder to the head of the organization, the boss thumbed through the documents quickly. Growing increasingly aggravated, noticing there had been no improvement with the communication skills. Stating the subject had been questionable in multiple notations, the boss asked for the cause of the assumptions. Christopher attempted to explain she would not leave the room nor speak with him. The boss listened to the whining as he continued, interrupting him after nothing but excuses left his lips. The boss demanded answers in reference to her skills and purpose. I have really bad headaches, so you please excuse me for not meeting your deadline, Maggie stated to the boss snidely, crossing her arms as she leaned against the wall. Tripping several times into the kitchen table, while covering her face from the sunlight and sitting down as she asked the boss, what was all of that about yesterday? Christopher stopped the description and stated to Luke, out of the blue, the boss was holding a tray of food I had not seen since stationed within the fields of Asia. Luke listened intently when Christopher added. Maggie's eyes lit up brightly upon seeing the food, though she did not speak any further. Christopher described a sweet breading with a hard-boiled egg in the middle of the bun breading mixture. Smothered and surrounded with the bread, and in the center the even sweeter meat encompassed the hard-boiled egg. Maggie could not thank the head of the company enough as she accepted the offering without any words spoken. Placing a bowl of chicken feet next to the container holding the baby fried octopi, her smile increased as she appreciated every bit. Next to a different bamboo cylinder, the boss placed a bowl with 3 sweet lotus balls along the side of the smorgasbord. A plate holding 2 custard egg pies were placed next to a glass square plate holding a noodle with shrimp in the middle. While sauce had been poured over the wrap, a different bamboo container was placed on the table. Shrimp wrapped within a translucent shell had been seasoned while being steamed. Chuckling, Christopher remarking while slowly panicking within his center, I have never held a person prisoner whom I held as captive for any length of time who has ever genuinely and innocently offered food to me or the other captives. He calmed down and then said, the boss happily ate the food with Maggie in silence, and without saying one word to the other, the plates and bowls were intuitively passed. Pausing before he choked, saying to Luke, "Though I saw the food removed from the container and placed onto their plates, the community dish just never seemed to empty." Then they started laughing, but nothing had been stated out loud, Christopher explained, turning almost clear from the horror of that memory. He added, "My boss asked me if I wanted to join the feast, and I did, but hesitated from the oddities." Luke nodded. "That is completely understandable." Continuing with the description of events, Christopher told of the non-conversation at the kitchen table. Though Maggie and the boss were talking in their usual manner, apparently, while eating, Christopher left out of the conversation and was a little bit hurt. Though her lips did not move one bit, he could hear each word she spoke. Thanking him for the cooking of the food telepathically, she explained she was unable to eat certain types of foods after a specific injury. Telling him the food smelled lovely and there was no cause for jealousy from the food, she expressed her appreciation of his efforts. Grinning softly in his direction, she slowly moved her hand from his to grab the chopsticks. Eating what her body would allow, the boss told Christopher verbally he would leave the necessities to assist fixing her health in the cabin. Looking directly into his eyes in such a gentle manner, Christopher had never seen from his boss before. Christopher nodded 4 times in her direction at the same time the boss had, before returning the look at the head of the mercenaries. The boss and Christopher nodded their heads at one another before Maggie popped her head out of the plate. Smiling, and without a word or sound, she returned their nods 4 separate times. A few minutes passed, and the boss used a napkin to wipe the chin before disappearing, but the house was full with all the necessities. Christopher stated, stunned, still years later. When the boss left the cabin, Christopher described the hardships to come around the corner. He did not realize she needed more than food to speak of anything with him. The few weeks of silence rapidly transitioned into several months. Not learning of the necessary lesson, Maggie continued to keep to herself, as Christopher had not learned. Christopher admitted to Luke he was only able to get to a certain length of time without a specified high-action type of training. Having taken care of the excess overgrowth and brush on the property, the landscape seemed as if a professional came through. On a consistent basis, he continued working on the land and house until there was nothing left to complete. Christopher told Luke he had sneaked out from his own cabin, but he did not know if it would be worth it. Waiting until dawn, he loaded the vehicle, while Christopher described his surprise when reaching the training camp, seeing less than half of the agents expected to be working out while waiting for the signal. Go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com, and you can click on the picture of the book and purchase it online. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.